Shalom everybody, I'm Barry Segal and this is the VFI News from Israel. First, I'd like to share a Bible verse with all of you, Jeremiah chapter 15 verse 21, where it says, "And I will deliver you from the hand of the wicked and redeem you from the hand of the oppressors." Well, all of Israel is rejoicing over the release of hostages this past week, but especially the most recent ones, Yarden Bibas, Ofer Calderon, and Keith Segal, who was also born in the United States, and they're returning home after 484 days in captivity held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now also, we're going to be sharing about the ceasefire deal a bit more in Gaza, and it's holding up at the moment, if you want to call it a ceasefire. And there's an extended ceasefire in southern Lebanon, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been invited to the White House to meet President Donald Trump next week. He is the first foreign leader, get you, to receive this invitation from a foreign country. And I believe it's also to move forward towards a finalization of an agreement with Saudi Arabia, furthering the Abrahamic Accords. Preventing that agreement was one of Hamas's main goals on their attack against Israel on the October 7th, 2023 attack. But Israel's ambassador to the United States this week said that it's back on track and very close to fruition. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom and welcome again to VFI News. Well, as I said in the introduction, the ceasefire is holding in Gaza, for better or for worse, and we're celebrating the release of Arbel Yehud, Agam Berger, and Gadi Moses, as well as 5 hostages from Thailand, whose only crime was to be working on agricultural projects in these Gaza border communities that got attacked by Hamas on October 7, 2023. Now, they were kidnapped and they have been held hostage for well over 480 days, which is proof, if you ask me, that Hamas is not only wickedly evil and depraved, they're also very stupid and irrational. There was no reason whatsoever, even an evil one, for these men to have been hostage all this time. I won't even try to pronounce the names of these 5 Thai guys, but we rejoice together with Thailand in their freedom and wish them a speedy recovery from their traumatic experiences. We also want to say thank you, Thailand, for all those that came and do come and serve in Israel. The joy we have at seeing all these hostages come home is, of course, tempered by other things, such as the confirmation this week that 8 of the hostages that are set to be released in this first round are already dead. In addition to this being sad in its own right, it also raises questions about how many of the other remaining hostages that we were hoping to bring home in the second phase of the ceasefire deal might even still be alive. Another big issue, of course, is the release from Israeli prisons of hundreds of terrorists. Many of them were serving life sentences for murder, and most of these guys, some of them, were exiled into Egypt. Now, some of the less dangerous characters, or at least they'd been convicted of less serious crimes, were released back to their home villages in Judea and Samaria, or even the eastern neighborhoods of Jerusalem. Now, the release of these terrorists, who had been imprisoned for very good reasons, is a cause for concern. It must be added to the fact that we've already seen enormous amounts of weapons and money smuggled into Judea and Samaria by Iran. They're trying to support Hamas and criminal street gangs like the Lions Den group because this makes trouble for Israel as well as the Palestinian Authority, not to mention Jordan. Now, by the way, let me just tell all of you this. Somewhere, a poll was taken that about 80% of those that are terrorists return to commit more acts of terrorism. So this is not a good sign for the future. Anyhow, continuing, the IDF and Shin Bet and Border Police have been carrying out extensive security operations in Judea and Samaria for over a year now. But the main effort, of course, was in Gaza and in Lebanon, so the resources that could be devoted to other fronts were limited. However, with ceasefires both in Lebanon temporarily, and Gaza, there are now enough troops to carry out a more serious campaign in Judea and Samaria. Operation Iron Walls was in fact launched over the last week with the main effort in the city of Jenin, just north of Jerusalem. Now, the Palestinian Authority police were essentially pushed out of the city over a year ago, and in the last few weeks they've been trying to take back control. But they didn't, and they don't have the numbers or the firepower necessary to overcome the Iranian-backed and armed groups that had taken control of the streets there, so the IDF had to go in and clean up the operation itself. Now, they've had some success, but the operation is likely to continue for several more weeks. And in the meantime, the Israeli Air Force has also been ordered to carry out airstrikes again on terrorist attacks within Judea and Samaria in these terrorist strongholds, something we've never ever seen before. I'll tell you very candidly that this makes me a little bit nervous because this is a tiny country and these airstrikes are occurring not so far away from where I lay my head down to sleep every night. So I hope they get their targets right. Well, that's not a good feeling, friends, although I'm sure this is necessary. I just hope a better way can be found to push this darkness back, and prayer helps lead the way. Speaking of pushing the darkness back, there is, of course, another front in this war, and that's the northern front, which is actually two fronts, Lebanon and Syria. The news from Syria is pretty short and straightforward. The IDF remains deployed on the Syrian side of the border, and Defense Minister Israel Katz declared during a visit to the troops up there last week that they'll remain deployed in this buffer zone that extends to the southern outskirts of Damascus indefinitely, on the road to Damascus. This is deemed necessary because despite some very nice words from the leadership of the new regime that is holding on to a fragile control of the country, the fact is that Syria is really up for grabs at this point. And somebody recommended, and I'll recommend to all of you, this long film with Peter O'Toole called Lawrence of Arabia. If you want to understand the mess in the Middle East, that's a good film to watch. Now, a high-level delegation of Russian officials was in Damascus this week to try to finalize plans for retaining control of the naval base at Tartus and Hamimim Air Base near Latakia, if I got the name correct. Turkey still has troops in the northern part of the country who are battling Kurdish forces in the east, where most of the oil production is, just by the way. ISIS is lurking around trying to make a comeback in Syria, and the U.S. still has special forces troops in the country who are officially still at battle against them. But these American troops are also there to make sure the Turks don't completely overwhelm the Kurds, who are U.S. allies and to some extent are also Israeli allies. Meanwhile, Abu Mohammed al-Julani was named president for a transitional period on Wednesday, while many other state institutions left over from the Assad regime were abolished. So al-Julani is now the quote-unquote transitional president of Syria. But there are lots of outside powers who would like to make him their client. We'll see who ends up winning that contest. Or maybe he'll manage somehow to maintain his independence, but I don't want to comment too much on that. But for now, the IDF is staying in place to make sure that whatever happens in Syria, there won't be any threats to Israel coming out of that country. However, some geostrategic experts argue that the IDF's presence in what was officially designated as Syrian territory gives the regime an excuse to menace Israel, possibly a way to distract ordinary Syrians from their own difficult situation. And that's an old trick of these autocratic regimes. They love to play, and there might be some merits to those arguments, but even if there is, it is outweighed by other considerations. If you ask me, in fact, I don't think the IDF will ever come down from the Syrian parts of the Golan Heights. In fact, I have another idea. We could open up a bigger ski resort up there. Well, this is the strategic high ground that dominates the region. Standing up there, you can look northeast and see Damascus, turn to the left and see Tyre, Sidon, and Beirut. Then you can turn around and look south to Haifa, Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem. You can see all that without even using binoculars. With a good pair of those, though, you can even see Cyprus on a clear day. From up there, the IDF has a clear shot at every tank that might ever try to approach the Israeli border from the north, and by placing radars up there, they'll have a much easier time defending against any aircraft, drones, or missiles heading this way from Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and even Iran. In other words, it's just too good a place to give up. And I think Israel has grounds for staying there, at least as long as Turkish troops are also holding positions inside of Syria, to say nothing of the Russian and American troops deployed there, and who knows, might even try to get in as well. Just before moving on to news about Lebanon, I just want to share with all of you, I would appreciate if you give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the VFI News at the Vision for Israel YouTube channel. And there are good reasons for this. It helps all around. And also, I think what makes us different in this news program is I feed you and give you lots of information, not just speculation, not just wonderful ideas in the head or captions that attract your magnetic minds to. I try to give you the news as it is, and so I'll continue with that. Thank you. Moving over to Lebanon, the 60-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah ended on Sunday, but Israel asked the United States for permission to extend the IDF's deployment for another 30 days for a few different and good reasons. Hezbollah has not brought its forces north of the Litani River as they were supposed to do, and the Lebanese National Army has not moved in to take control of the area between the Litani and the Israeli border as they were supposed to do. So what's this ceasefire anyways? Also, the IDF is still doing searches of the area and finding Hezbollah tunnels and weapons storage facilities. The IDF has been telling the Lebanese forces about these things in accordance with the ceasefire agreement, but again, the LNA, or the Lebanese National Army, is ill-equipped and even less motivated to demolish these tunnels and depots. They have also been very slow to deploy in the area as they're supposed to do. They seem to be hoping that the IDF will just leave so that they can go back to looking the other way while Hezbollah moves back in and rebuilds its presence along the border. The other possibility, though, is maybe the Lebanese army is looking the other way because they want Israel to stay there. That's even a better idea. In fact, on Sunday, when the ceasefire was supposed to end, we got a chance to see just how enthusiastic the Lebanese National Army is to actually doing some real work. Large numbers of villagers had gathered in southern Lebanon, hoping to return to their homes in these border area villages. So the IDF sent repeated, and I say repeated, warnings to the Lebanese government and the army that they were still in these villages and the civilians should not approach. But Hezbollah decided to test the resolve of the IDF. So they sent provocateurs into these crowds of villagers to try and goad them into rushing towards the IDF positions. The Lebanese army didn't do much to try and prevent this from happening, and when the villagers and the Hezbollah agents did try to move in, the IDF soldiers fired warning shots. This was met with mixed success, and in confused and chaotic situation, 22 people were killed and over 100 others wounded. In the end, the villagers retreated and the IDF maintained their position. Let that be a warning to you, Hezbollah. It had the potential to yet be another public relations disaster for Israel, except that Hezbollah's domestic opponents in Lebanon, including several Christian factions, quickly and loudly blamed Hezbollah for provoking the situation. This is something we've never seen before, friends, and it's very encouraging. The domestic Lebanese opposition to Hezbollah is not afraid of them anymore, and they're ready to let everybody know it. When Hezbollah does something foolish that ends up getting a bunch of people killed and they try to blame Israel for it, there are voices that rise up to put the blame on them instead. Rah, rah, very good. So we thank you all in Lebanon who rise up against Hezbollah. Boot them out of the country. However, Hezbollah wasn't ready to give up, and they made several more attempts to force the issue over the next couple days, despite an agreement between Israel and the Lebanese government, negotiated with help from the United States to extend the ceasefire and the IDF's presence in southern Lebanon until at least February 18th. All of this is a reminder that Israel is still at war and a renewal of large-scale hostilities is still a very real possibility. That's why here at Vision for Israel, we have not slowed down our efforts to provide bomb safety shelters to communities at risk of rocket fire. We need your support. Don't stop now. All right, we have also continued to support medical first response teams, firefighters, and other civil defense teams with equipment and training, especially along the northern border right now. We're also providing assistance to hundreds of families that are in financial distress. And this last project is probably going to take years to help Israelis to fully recover. Many families and entire communities are in need of help, and we're trying our best to give as much help to as many people as we can. If you want to be part of this effort, you can visit our website at visionforisrael.com and click on the projects tab. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up to our newsletter so you'll get updates on how you can pray more effectively for Israel and be in touch with us. Now back to the news, and the other big story this week is that U.S. President Donald Trump has taken several measures that signal his determination to support Israel and push back against the growing tide of anti-Semitism in the United States. This week, he signed yet another executive order revoking the visas of foreign students studying at U.S. universities if they publicly display support for Hamas, which is, after all, designated as a terrorist organization in the United States State Department. Bravo, President Donald Trump, and every Jewish person on the face of this earth should be thanking that this president is standing for Israel and the Jewish people and against anti-Semitism. I am astounded that anyone objects to this measure, but of course there are already voices rising up to say that this is a violation of the First Amendment guarantees of free speech and freedom of assembly. To this we can only say, yeah, whatever, and move on. Arguing with shameless hypocrites is a waste of time and energy, in my humble opinion. And by the way, if you are for anti-Semitism, then you don't deserve to even visit the United States or Israel. That's my opinion. Back to President Trump, he also announced this week that he is inviting Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to be the first foreign leader to come to a state visit at the White House in his new administration. This is a great honor, my friends, and it's also a great show of support for Israel. However, I will tell you frankly that there is also something about that situation that sets off a few alarm bells in the back of my mind, and I'll tell you why. President Trump has made it very clear that his biggest priority in the Middle East for his second presidential term is a normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. He sees that as a continuation of the Abrahamic Accords, which he brokered in his first term, and we've seen some good things out of that. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman really wants to give Trump this foreign policy achievement. This agreement was very close to being finalized 16 months ago, and stopping it was one of the main objectives of Hamas on October 7, 2023. Now, Saudi Arabia is thrilled beyond measure that Israel has smashed both Hamas and Hezbollah in this war so far. I'm sure they're also not sorry that the Assad regime has been removed in Syria. These developments massively weaken Iran, Saudi Arabia's main rival for leadership in the Muslim world. But Turkey, another potential rival, like from the dead, has also made some gains from all of this. So that's something the Saudis will have to watch. However, Saudi Arabia's other great enemy, the Salafi jihadist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, have also been greatly weakened in this war. And last but certainly not least, the Houthis in Yemen, who have also threatened Saudi Arabia, have been hit hard by Israel, as well as the United States and Great Britain over the last year. So Saudi Arabia right now is sitting pretty good, having made tremendous strategic gains over the past 16 months without having to spend one single penny or risk even one of its soldiers. Now, bin Salman is reportedly offering Trump $600 billion worth of investments in the U.S. economy over the next 4 years, which would do a lot to help Trump keep his campaign promise to the American people to improve the economy. Now, Trump would love to make bin Salman happy in order to get all that money, and bin Salman has big plans for his country's future, which he'll need American and even Israeli help to push forward. At this point, I'm sure you're asking the obvious question of what about all this makes me nervous? After all, I've said many times on this program that I'd love to see a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia, as it would sure be quickly by normalization with other countries such as Indonesia, which is one of the biggest Christian populations in the whole earth, and probably several other countries. The economic boom from this would allow Israel to recover quickly from this war and bring all kinds of other benefits. So what is there to be nervous about, friends? Well, I'm nervous about it for the simple reason that Israel is going to be asked to do something to make all this possible. And the most obvious thing Trump and bin Salman are likely to ask for could be a Palestinian state, although I hope not. You might remember the quote-unquote deal of the century that Trump talked about in his first term, which included a plan for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Well, that plan didn't go through, but this time it stands a much better chance. With Israel coming out of the toughest war since the establishment of the state, bruised and economically battered, needing friends and needing money, with the U.S. needing an economic boost, and above all, with Saudi Arabia holding out $600 billion, anything, my friends, is possible. And with all that on the line, Trump will be sure to lean hard on Israel to say yes to a grand bargain that is sure to include the establishment of a Palestinian state. So for all of you out there, we need to stay in prayer. That, my friends, is likely to be the first thing on the agenda when Netanyahu meets with President Trump at the White House on Tuesday, and I ask you to join me in praying for him to have wisdom and discernment about how to proceed. Also pray for President Donald Trump and, of course, Marco Rubio, the head of the State Department. I really like that guy a lot. This is something that itself could tear this country apart, socially, politically, and culturally, to say nothing of the spiritual and theological implications. Now, another issue that could tear this country apart is the drafting of ultra-Orthodox young men into the IDF. This issue was once again being batted around in the Knesset on the streets this past week in Israel, and it's sure to be a hot potato that continues to make waves for a long time. They've tried to resolve this issue many times, and the pressure to come to a real solution has never been higher. We'll keep an eye on it and bring you updates as they occur forward. Now, we're almost out of time for this week's report, and I want to continue to the tradition of ending with some good news. This past week, we marked International Holocaust Memorial Day and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz by the Red Army on January 27th, 1945. So why is that good news? It's good news because despite a terrifying rise in anti-Semitism all over the world, there is still a recognition of the uniquely evil nature of the Holocaust. 80 years later, there's still a recognition of the need to remember the lessons that this terrible episode in Jewish and human history has taught us. There is still a widely held belief that such evil depravity must never be allowed to happen again. And I say never. Until next week, this has been a long report, but I'm glad to share with all of you. My name is Barry Segal. Shalom, shalom.